Hello and welcome to round 4 here at the Tata Steel Chess Tournament. It is early in Charlotte. Dania, how is that coffee?
Well, it's early for chess players. I realized to my horror that's actually tea. I've traded in completely. I've resigned the game. Made some loose leaf tea, but the games never fail to wake me up. It's like the strongest cup of coffee anywhere. All I need is a couple of Najdorf Sicilian. All I need is round 4 of Tata Steel. If only round 4 had just begun. Oh, wait a minute. It has. I can't wait to jump into the action, Fiona. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I am super excited for another day packed with fun matchups and fun action.
Absolutely. Let's hope the players are in a fighting mood today. And let's remind everyone already, tomorrow is a rest day. So often the players, they give it their all. Tomorrow they can rest all they want. But before we go to the games, let's have a very quick look at the results from yesterday. So yesterday we had two decisive results. The first decisive game of the day was Hare Krishna taking down the leader, Niels Grandelius. And then the second one was actually the last game of the day to finish, kept us here till late at night. Alireza Firouzja playing a positional masterpiece to beat the winner of last year's Challengers Group, David Anton.
Indeed, and yesterday was equally defined by the non-decisive matchups. Of course, Aryan Tari drawing his compatriot, one Magnus Carlsen, relatively unknown player. That was a big result for Aryan, particularly with the black pieces, drawing an endgame where, Magnus was renowned for his ability to squeeze those endgames, and really the heartbreaker, Fabi playing an absolutely spectacular tactical game against jan-krzysztof. Really just a phenomenal calculation throughout the whole game, but jan-krzysztof, incredible calculation to save the game in time pressure. Fabi was winning at one point, didn't drive it all the way home. All of these players are going to be hungry to continue their good play this round.
Yeah, and with Fabiano and Magnus failing to capitalize on those white pieces, that means that we now have a big tie in the lead of the tournament. Let's bring up the pairing. So a five-way tie at the top with Hare Krishna, Magnus Carlsen, Anish Giri, Fabiano Caruana, and Niels Grandelius on 2 out of 3.
Indeed, it is a log jam at the top, and definitely the leaders will be defined at the end of this round coming into rest day number 1. I'm pretty sure that we'll see a more well-defined group of leaders. And we've got some mouth-watering matchups today, Fiona.
Absolutely. Let's bring up our favorites, the boxing like head to head.
Yep.
Even there, you can always feel some of them look friendly, others look like, yeah, I'm gonna crush your soul
Yeah.
today.
Oh, yeah. I'm coming to this tournament. I'm scoring some points. Well, I think they're all thinking that, but they're all going to score some points. They all already have. Everyone's on the board.
Already have, yeah. I mean, we said it yesterday. I think it's really great to have nobody on 0 out of 3, because we've mentioned it so many times. And here, well, the last matchup of the day, probably the main one. And here we have the pairings one more time, giving us a bit more time to discuss them. The last one there was Jurriaan van Foreest, the local hero, taking on Magnus Carlsen. What
Magnus
do you
looked
expect?
really intimidating. Sorry to interrupt you, Fiona. Magnus looked particularly intimidating.
He really does.
Yeah, I mean, Jurriaan. I don't think Jurriaan is going to be looking at that boxing video before the round. I think he's jumping. He's more intimidated by Magnus's opening repertoire, but Jurriaan has shown his ability time and time again to compete on equal terms with the top of the top.
Yeah, he's so far undefeated this year, and today with the white pieces, I think he'll be look. Well, we'll get to the games in a second, but I expect Jordan to be looking for a fight today against the world champion. What else do we have? One matchup is between two players from our leaders group. It's Pantala Hare Krishna against Fabiano Caruana. How do you think Fabiano is going to feel after the missed opportunity from yesterday?
Well, Fabi is a very objective player. I think he doesn't really tilt that easily, and that's one thing that's always impressed me about him is the fact that he can have a disappointing result and then come in the next game and make a very solid draw. Hare Krishna is playing with the white pieces, so Fabi is going to play for a win. He's going to use his chances, but he's not going to play, e4, b5, or he's not going to go crazy. He's going to play what he would play win, lose, or draw in the previous round, I believe.
Well, shall we? We can discuss the remaining pairings as we get to the games. Shall we see, actually? Maybe start with Fabiano C and confirm that he hasn't opened with 1b5.
Yeah, well, I believe, has played b5. Yeah, he has, but it wasn't on move 1. It was on move 5, actually. It was a Rai Lopez, which, really needs no introduction nor explanation.
We actually, would you agree? We have seen very few. Have we even seen a single Rai Lopez?
Yes. I mean, I'm trying to scratch my memory. I mean, I really don't remember a single one.
I think we haven't had a single one.
That's actually quite crazy. I mean, it's such a common opening. We didn't have a Berlin. That's crazy. I mean, you can remember how many Berlins you would have, like even a year or two ago. I think there has been this.
We just had very few E4, E5s. We had one Italian, we had one Petrov, but very little E4, E5 action.
Yeah, that is just quite crazy. I mean, wow. But anyways, we did have a Rai Lopez here, and Fabio responding with the I believe this is called, and this is actually embarrassing, I think this is the Archangel, bishop c5. I just know this is the bishop c5 variation. And people who know the Rai Lopez would know that bishop e7 is the sort of traditional main line. And after rook e1, b5, bishop b3, black can play d6, or black can play the Marshall attack, which is castle c3, d5. That's a gambit. But not to delve too deeply into these sidelines, bishop c5 is a very popular sideline among all levels. And Hare Krishna responding with a4, very typical move, opening up the queen side and then occupying the center. And now this move a5. And after a5, the whole idea is that black takes on a5, let's say the knight. Then this e5 pawn, and that's the classic Rai Lopez pawn, this e5 pawn is going to fall. So that pawn on a5, I believe, is basically untouchable. Fabi drops his bishop back. Hare Krishna stops Fabi from developing his bishop to g4. And so Fabi says, all right, I'll be in ghetto it. I still think this is well within the range of theory. I'm quite sure this has arisen many, many times, Fiona. Really, the action is yet to come here.
But bishop c5 usually an indicator that black, wants some active play and is looking for a very fighting game here today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this line, bishop c5, it's not the kind of line you play. It's not like the Berlin. There's no forced draw against it. And you play it if you want a good combative game. It is dangerous in the sense that it requires knowledge of a lot of theory. But Fabi is very well known for his incredible opening preparation and has been known for that for many years.
Yeah, actually, speaking of, he's been working for a number of years with Rustam Kazimjanov, and I actually just saw Rustam for the first time here today in Vik just 10 minutes ago, because today it is the day before the rest day, so it's the day where everyone has to go for their second COVID tests. And I think Fabiano had said on the opening, Rustam, on principle, won't come to the playing hall. He'll just, stay in the room in these COVID times. But today he made a rare appearance here at the playing hall.
He made the trek down. Well, I have a joke. I have an early morning joke for you, Fiona. What did Kazimjanov help Fabi do after Fabi didn't play chess for a year? Shake off the Rustam.
Maybe we can work on delivery.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was so funny that I needed to understate it because I knew people would basically die laughing. But it's something, at least. I mean, it's 8:13 a.m. Who can really make jokes at 8:13 a.m.? But anyways, back to the position. What is White's main move here? I'm pretty sure that Rustam, among others, have helped Fabiano prepare in this position. I believe that White needs to decide where to put this bishop on c1. One square is, of course, g5. That really needs no explanation. You're pinning the knight. And often what you see in these positions, I've seen this a million times, is black tries to excommunicate the bishop. And of course, the sacrifice on g5 needs to be very well evaluated because, the queen's going to come out to f3. This is a super sharp position. I actually still think this is probably theory. And this has occurred. And the other way of developing is bishop e3. And you might look at this and say, well, wait a second, you're just blundering a pawn. But no, if you take a look at this knight, it's being x-rayed by white's rook. And with this move d5, white basically wins a piece. After bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, both knights are hanging, and you can't move one knight. And best you can do is give up one of the knights for a pawn, but that is, of course, not satisfactory compensation, Fiona. So I think these two moves, among others, and bishop e3 has just been played.
Bishop e3 has been played, and Fabi, actually, if we look at his clock times, he's currently been blitzing out all his moves up 2 minutes from the starting time. And let's see if bishop e3 comes as a surprise here. It seems to be going for his first little think of the game, but sometimes the players are, of course, just trying to remember the different lines.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, the top players are humans, and it's not a great sign. And I've shared a couple stories from my game with Fabi at the 2017 US Championship, but another one is that I played the French with black. I don't know what I was thinking. I played the French. I really don't know what I was thinking against Fabi, of all people. He, of course, goes for the main line. And I had done some good preparation before the tournament. And I mixed up the move order of one of the main lines. And it wasn't the sort of mix up that's forgivable. I mean, I'm basically losing out of the opening. And the moment I mixed up the move order, Fabi starts to think. And I'm like, oh no, Fabi is thinking. That means I've done something that's not theoretical. That means I'm probably losing. And I was.
I mean, yesterday, it's funny what he was saying reminds me a little bit of yesterday when we talked about this insane game between Fabiano and Jan-Krzysztof Duda. And I have to say, it was really so brave by Duda. You know, he said he knew if he played the Petrov, he was probably entering Fabiano's World Championship match prep, but he said, I was just too curious and wanted to see what he had in store there, which is incredibly brave.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to test man, this is such a solid opening. What is it that my opponent can do to me? But anyways, here's the fascinating thing, Fiona. We have 3 Rai Lopez's, and I mentioned if we can quickly go to MBL against Anton, and we will, of course, check into Magnus and the other interesting matchups. But just very quickly, we do actually have a Marshall in the game between MBL and David Anton. And the Marshall is this move d5. I just mentioned it while talking about Hari's game, and I didn't know that David Anton had played it. This is a gambit, and it is a gambit that is named after American player Frank James Marshall, who was a very, very interesting, very combative chess player. I believe he played this against former, world champion Jose Raul Capablanca, the Cuban genius. And I actually think Marshall actually lost the first game, but he nonetheless did some analysis in this line, and the line bears his name. So black sacrifices the pawn.
Actually, maybe let me ask you a question, because I've never played the Marshall from either side, and my understanding, just watching these games from afar, was always that if both players know the line super well, that it often leads to a forced draw. How correct is that assessment?
I think that's pretty correct. I think if you check correspondence chess, and we see very typical moves being played here, this is a little bit odd, that move rook e4, for example, but it's actually quite normal. I mean, the rook coming to h4 is quite normal, trying to smoke that queen out of h3. And I think by and large, Fiona, your assessment is correct. I think a lot of top games do end in draws because, this has been, first of all, so exhaustively analyzed that if you mentioned this in the 1970s, people would look at you and say, what do you mean? Marshall draw, it's very combative. But now, black's activity usually counterbalances white's extra pawn. I've had the Marshall several times from both sides. I played it once with black, draw. Ding Liren played it against me with black. And, I was quite happy that he did, because I knew one of the drawing lines, and I managed to make a draw in a Pro Chess League game. And I think I faced it one more time, and that was also a draw. It's just very, very, very exhaustively analyzed, and white keeps coming up with new ideas. Black keeps analyzing them, and it always peters out somehow into a draw. But we will see if MBL has any new analysis. This move d3, by the way, for those interested in how the theory has developed, d4 has always been the main line. But I would say about 10, 15 years ago, players started realizing that the move d3 has its merits, because this keeps the e4 square defended. And that might not seem significant, but if you imagine later in the game a knight appearing on e4, or even a rook appearing on e4, That could be potentially important, Fiona. So we will see how this plays out.
Absolutely, shaping up to be an interesting game. Shall we check in with Magnus Carlsen on the black side against
No,
Jurriaan
Magnus,
Foreest?
I think too weak. I don't think he deserves for us to commentate his game, honestly. Sure, absolutely. And another Ray Lopez, amazing.
They are making up for the what's the word?
The
Something
lack
with
of
D. Yeah, is there a
dearth.
word like a dearth? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good word. Dearth of the paucity of Ray Lopez is that's
Thank
another
you.
good word. The paucity, it's best said in a British accent. The paucity of Roy Lopez is in this tournament is quite appalling.
Actually,
Sip on
speaking
my tea.
of British accents, in not too long from now, about 40 minutes from now, we'll have our first guest, and it will be Doctor and Grandmaster John Nunn. So maybe he can pronounce that for us.
Yeah, certainly wouldn't presume to try even the British accent. That's incredible. What a guest! What a guest! Yeah, John Nunn is absolute legend. We'll talk more about him soon. We will have another legendary guest coming later, but we'll keep that a surprise for now. Let's take a look at what variation of the Ray Lopez Magnus played. And Magnus playing yet another sort of, I think this is called the Molar, bishop b7. So we have seen two ways to develop the dark squared bishop, right? David Anton developing it to e7 and Fabi developing it to c5. Magnus develops the other bishop first. And this line is sort of related to the main lines. And it's important to recognize that knight g5 may come to mind. Wait a minute, isn't this winning? Nope. Black can play much like he does in the fried liver, d5. He takes d5, and I believe either even knight d4 or knight a5. And the thing is, black roots out this bishop, and that's no good for white. Once the Ray Lopez bishop disappears, white's play really doesn't go anywhere. And so this has been proven to be fine for black. Jurriaan instead focusing on developing his pieces, knight c3, a3 to create an escape square for his bishop in the event of knight a5. But Magnus going knight d4, sticking the knight in the center, offering up a pawn. Jurriaan could have accepted it, but then after knight takes b3, takes something like d5, kind of like the Marshall, Fiona. What black gets all this counterplay and white's pawn structure is ruined. So Jurriaan instead taking the knight, and we have this very interesting position on the board. What are your thoughts about what's transpiring so far?
I think it's interesting that Magnus is choosing a somewhat off the beaten track line here against Jurriaan's Ray Lopez. Jurriaan, who's very well prepared. I think it makes sense to take an approach where you don't go for some absolute main lines to test your opponent, but rather try to get an off the beaten track position where Magnus can try and outplay Jurriaan, in the middle game.
No, definitely. The Molar is far from being the main line. It's, it's reputable. It's not one of those crazy sidelines, but it definitely is a sideline without a doubt. It's off the beaten path in the sense that bishop e7 is quite a bit more theoretical. And I think Jurriaan's move d3 is also not quite the most, I don't want to say combative. I think it's probably just as good as the main lines, but I believe usually in the Ray Lopez, when you're playing the main lines, you play like c3, d4. That seems to be the most topical. And Jurriaan has shown that positionally and in these complex middle games, I was also impressed with this game yesterday against Wojciech, which a game that kind of flew under the radar. But hey, Jurriaan had maybe a slightly worse middle game. Radek is an incredibly strong positional player, and he drew the game from a position of strength. I mean, he played a flawless positional game.
Yeah, an impressive start from Jurriaan, who is still unbeaten in this year's Tata Steel, and certainly shaping up to be an interesting game, this one.
Absolutely. So maybe I can run through some of the key ideas as I see it in the middle game. Now, what we need to notice here is the fact that the center is kind of unbalanced. I mean, that just visually is apparent. And, black's pawns on c5 and d4 do look imposing. And black can contribute to his central control by playing a timely d5. So I think Jurriaan has to deal with that. And he also has to deal with this knight on e2. That knight is currently not very employed. So one idea that comes to mind is knight to f4, just centralizing the knight. And if Magnus plays d5, then Jurriaan could meet that with e5, and the knight is pressuring. But I don't like this move as much because it blocks the development of the bishop. We've talked about the dangers of that. So the move I like more is knight to g3. That is a very typical idea in the Ray Lopez, old as the hills. that knight potentially can access the f5 square. And if Magnus playing d5 here, which he very well might, then I still think Jordan could respond with e5, let's say knight d7, and he could support this pawn with f4. The one concerning thing, Fiona, I think, is after c4, bishop a2, this bishop is definitely out of the game for the time being. But
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's permanently out of the game. It can go to b1, and later that diagonal can be opened.
that does make sense. I'm a little bit so if with this idea that you're just showing, if the bishop goes back to b1 and then we play c3, do we not have to be concerned? No, there's no way black can just entomb the bishop, I guess.
Well, black can try this, and then, you know, the thing is, white actually, and I know this is a weird thing to say, white doesn't always need all of his pieces to really generate attacking chances. So something like f5 here, and you can see, you know, queen g4, knight h5, white's got a lot of pieces that are in the game, and they can be enough to overpower black's king side, because black's king isn't very well protected.
I love the look on those pawns on e5 and f5.
Yeah, very appealing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is dangerous. So black can't fall asleep on the king side just because the bishop is sort of bad for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super rich position, and it'll be interesting to see which approach the players decide to go for.
Absolutely. You know, Jordan can also perhaps develop his bishop to g5. That's certainly a viable alternative. And we will monitor how he solves this opening problem. But shall we have a look at some of the other games?
Yeah, let's maybe go to Alireza Firouzja, who played such a brilliant game yesterday, and today he's up against another youngsters. Both of them are of Iranian descent. Alireza currently playing for the FIDE flag, while Tari was born in Norway, of course, and always has represented Norway.
Absolutely, and Alireza choosing once again one of his favorite recent openings, the Caro Khan, and we see the advanced Caro with e5. And the bishop e2 variation. I think this has happened once before. Did Magnus
in his own game? Alireza played this as black. Was it against Magnus?
Right, I think it was. Maybe somebody could remind us, but I'm pretty sure I've seen this once before this tournament in Alireza's game. I mean, which is not surprising because this line with bishop e2 is considered to be one of the most testing and popular systems against the Caro.
Actually, I think it was definitely against, or was it against MVL?
It might have. Yes, I think the draw against MVL.
Yeah,
exactly.
He had this double black, but yeah, I think it was MVL.
Agreed. And you know, this is very well studied, and I think Aryan choosing a bit of a different system than MVL. I think MVL kind of oriented himself toward playing c4 at some point. Whereas Tari says, all right, I'm going to defend the pawn on d4. I'm going to build up the pawn chain, much like you do kind of in the advanced French. And then he plays this move, knight e1. Now, this move, knight e1 is, I've seen this idea before, that knight is reshuffling to d3. And why is this maneuver necessary? Well, there's a couple of things. If the knight gets to d3, first of all, it's going to discourage black from playing c5. Black can certainly play c5 now. And that does come with its attendant dangers. You know, it weakens this diagonal, and, you know, even g4 needs to be considered here at some point. That bishop on f5 could get in trouble in certain positions. And sometimes this trade is actually very beneficial for white. White can then run his f-pawn straight down the middle. And it can be very hard to stop this idea. I actually think g4 is a very legitimate threat, positional threat in this position. So Alireza has to come up with something against that. And the other thing is that, you know, once that knight moves away, sometimes this bishop opens up and you discourage black from sometimes playing h5. You sometimes see this move. Actually, h5 may be interesting here to stop g4. And if you take on h5, and I think queen h4 is going to create very, very nasty threats down the h file. So we'll see how Alireza responds to this, but knight e1 is well within the bounds of normality.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he does. H5 certainly looks like an interesting option. But Alireza, he mentioned in an interview that day after the draw against MVL, you know, he loves the Caro Khan. So we'll see what he comes up with.
We certainly will. And as Alireza ponders his next move, let's have a look at some of the games that we have not seen. We have a couple of Najdorfs actually side by side here. Any preference? Or should we have a look at Duda Giri maybe first?
Okay, let's start with Dudaguri, and then we'll get to the
The
Najdorfs.
Najdorfs. Yeah, and this one is, of course, a Grunfeld. And then it has the signature bishop on g7. You can just tell open center, fianchetted bishop, and 1d4. A combination of those things tells you Grunfeld, and it was indeed a Grunfeld. But MVL is really known as the top Grunfeld specialist. Jurriaan, of course, also an opening expert. So this isn't a surprise choice from him. And we see here the main line. This is one of the most popular variations of the Grunfeld, one of the oldest lines as well. And this move b6, I'm not myself a Grunfeld specialist, full disclosure. What I do know is that the old school main line used to be take stakes and bishop g4, which is very logical. You're indirectly applying pressure on the d4 pawn. You're inducing this weakening move f3. Now black counterattacks white's bishop with knight a5. That used to be all the rage, but recently, well, relatively recently, people have started to play b6, and essentially you just sacrifice the pawn. And you do that in order to ruin white's pawn structure, to activate the bishop, and in order to also get this e5 square for black's knight, which Jurriaan immediately occupies. I have seen this entire line before, and I'm quite sure that black equalizes here with best play, but you have to remember a lot. And if you get one thing wrong with black, you can end up down a pawn for no compensation.
I always find this so dangerous to go for these, exercises in memorization, to go for a line that you're like, okay, I have to be confident. I
Oh, yeah.
remember every single detail of this variation, and one one wrong step, and I'm just a pawn down, and I'm seriously worse. So, but Anish, I mean, Anish is known for knowing his openings very well. So I'm confident, but still a risky approach.
Oh, absolutely. And as we mentioned, these players sometimes they do confuse lines. It doesn't happen very often because the amount of time that they just spent rehearsing their files, reviewing their analyses, but it does happen. And what also should be mentioned is that it's not that white has one line that he can go into. White has 7 or 8 different attempts, all of which are quite testing. And black has to know all of them. You have no idea which one your opponent is going to choose. So
Actually, well, speaking of options, what are our options here? As white, our knight is hit, and this central square is looking like the most natural, I guess.
yeah, knight d4 looks natural. The issue here might be this move queen c7. I'm not entirely sure. But this creates, of course, this pressure on the c3 pawn. And after bishop b4, I'm thinking that black can take a sort of tame approach and just develop his bishop to b7. This move a5 is very tempting. You might try to go after the c3 pawn. The issue here might be the counter-attacking move knight to b5, hitting the queen and defending c3. I'm sure this is also not that bad for black.
Yeah, in fact, jan-krzysztof has decided to drop back to a3.
Yeah, so he's decided to leave the d4 square for the bishop, which makes sense because that square is a very, very good when the bishop is centralized, and it will protect c3. And the knight, yes, knights on the rim are dim, but that's not entirely true because that knight can go back to c4 and try to dislodge its vis-a-vis on e5. So Duda definitely trying to consolidate here.
You said that black has a very narrow path, having to remember all the lines here. What is the idea for black? Is the idea to try and get the pawn back as quickly as possible, or just go for active play and get the pawn back in the longer term?
I think it's the latter. I think it's to go for active play and get the pawn. I mean, you wouldn't mind to get the pawn back. You would accept it if offered. It's like, I've eaten dinner, but if somebody offered me a burger, I probably wouldn't refuse it. But I think, queen c7 to that end is sensible here. If white plays bishop b3, I'm like, okay, sure, I'll take the pawn. White's not going to do that. White's going to go bishop d4. But by and large, I think, Fiona, yes, the idea is to go for activity, bishop b7, and then maybe put the rooks on d8 and c8, activate all the pieces, and hope for full compensation for the pawn. Maybe rook d8 first. I'm not entirely sure. This also makes a lot of sense.
Let's come back to this one. Let's see those two Najdorfs we have today.
Let's do it. So first we have Donchenko against Radek Wojciech, who is a perennial Najdorf player, in a very interesting position that we have on the board. Let's see how this happened. H3 essayed by Alexander. H3, of course, I think this is sometimes known as the Bobby Fischer variation, and it has been one of the most, if not the most popular line I would say in the past 5 years, White intends
Mm.
to expand on the king side with the move g4. And
Would you say this is the sharpest try against the Najdorf?
it is certainly, I mean, I think bishop g5 remains extremely dynamic instead of h3, but it definitely leads to very, very sharp positions, especially the line that Radek chooses, e5 and h5, which may seem quite radical, if that makes any sense, but it is actually, I think, the most popular. It is actually the most popular response against this line because Black simply stops g4. This idea of playing g4 is so annoying that it is worth creating this weakness on the king side to prevent this move from happening. And we see White instead playing g3, fianchettoing the bishop. This is all very normal. Knight c5, centralizing the knight, getting an outpost, and rook a7. Another, I would say, relatively typical Najdorf idea, which may seem weird, but you are preparing to deploy the bishop to b7.
I'm
And
very curious
wow,
because,
rook b7.
sorry, you said that until now everything sort of was very standard, but if we look at the clock times, Radek has already spent 25 minutes. So what was the move, do you think, that came as a surprise to him?
Yeah, my guess is maybe knight d5, because the way that I've often seen this done is I often see a4 played first, and after b4, then you go knight d5. But maybe in Alexander's preparation, he realized that the inclusion of these two moves somehow favors Black. And one way that might be possible is that as we see rook a7, bishop e3, chasing the rook to b7, and g4 anyway, sacrificing the pawn in order to open. Oh, actually, that's not even a sacrifice, because if you attempt to simply take the pawn myopically, then queen takes b7 will win the rook. So that rook is quite awkward. And Alexander can deploy his knight with knight g3, knight f5. Maybe the inclusion of a4, b4 in some lines favors Black. And that might be what Radek is wrestling with here.
And such a sharp position, and I mean, definitely a good sign for Alexander that he has somewhere managed to catch Radoslav off guard. I mean, it's always so nice when you play a game and you manage to catch your opponent somewhere. Somewhere you surprise them and you get this immediate, half hour up on the clock. But what are Black's options here after g4?
Yeah, Radoslav looking a little bit concerned. Well, this rook on b7 is what bothers me.
He's actually just gone h4. We saw him there on camera.
Yep, so he's trying to prevent this knight from activating via g3. And what is Alexander going to do? I mean, if this is still his preparation, then I'm pretty sure he definitely factored this move into his preparation. It does make sense. And I think that the key question for White is which side does he castle? And I wouldn't rule out either queenside or kingside castle, because one argument is that you want to castle queenside so that you can open up the kingside with f4. But the thing is, if you castle kingside, that doesn't rule out the move f4. In fact, it can make f4 even stronger. For example, let's say Black castles, we play f4. After e takes f4, knight takes f4, that rook is already poised to wreak havoc along the f file. And yes, it is true that White's king is a little bit weaker here. So you have to weigh the pros and cons, do a cost-benefit analysis. I think we're going to see Alexander either castle on one of the sides or maybe play f4 immediately. But this is very, very sharp indeed.
And this is one of the games today that we're certainly going to keep coming back to, shaping up to be a very, very exciting duel. Shall we see the other Najdorf that we had?
Indeed, we shall. Esipenko against Niels Grandelius, as Niels attempting to bounce back after that painful loss yesterday against Hari Krishna. And here we have a more tame Najdorf. The bishop e2 is considered to be, by many, the relatively the quietest line against the Najdorf, because White intends only to castle kingside. And that doesn't mean it's quiet in the grand scheme of things. It's still a Najdorf. It's still very, very full of life. But it was a favorite of Anatoly Karpov. After e5, knight b3, bishop e6. Here's a very interesting thing, Fiona. This move, bishop e6, as far as I remember, it's always been considered an inaccuracy due to f4, and queen c7, g4 has been the main line since like the 70s. But I think Niels has analyzed this position. In all of the books, you will find that bishop e7 first is always the recommended move. Bishop e6 is never recommended. But that's the fascinating thing about openings in the recent day and age. A lot of these things are being redefined, reconsidered. Computers are breathing new life into lines that were always considered bad before.
And I mean, it's also the beauty of having the players like Niels in this tournament that you mentioned. You know, he's such a creative player. But I'm struggling to understand still. I mean, I'm not a Najdorf player, and I think it's so tough to understand the different nuances and the little details as to what difference does it make, especially here, I guess, now that white didn't go d4, f4. Can you explain, or
Sure.
what difference
So
could it possibly make?
yeah, and maybe somebody, all right, show me your ID. What makes you qualified to explain the Najdorf? Well, I did play the Najdorf my whole life, basically, until I was around 25, 50. So I'm certainly nowhere near the level of expertise of some, but I'll attempt to maybe explain some of the key here. So I think what the game revolves around, the sort of the key factor, is this pawn on f4 and what happens to it. And one of the reasons that the development of the bishop to e6 is frequently discouraged is because white can play the move f5 with tempo. Why is the move f5 particularly good? Well, the problem is it attacks the bishop, right? Now, let's say we just take the knight. If you notice this d5 square, that square is really, really weak. And you can imagine a reality in which white can put a bishop on c4, he can put a piece on d5, and then he can start attacking on the king side with, for example, rook left. A lot of games have been lost because black doesn't really have any counterplay. You can just see how passive black's position can be if he can't break through with the move d5. So that's, I think, one of the key reasons that this is often delayed. And what is Niels possibly thinking here? Well, one of the things that black has started doing in response to the move f5 is this move bishop d7. The bishop is redeployed to c6, and basically black tries to break through with d5. If black is successful in breaking through with d5, then white's position can also collapse very, very quickly here. So I think that that's going to be the key. If white doesn't play f5, then black does sometimes take on f4 and then use that e5 square as a base of operation for his knight. So one very typical idea is to play e takes f4, and then knight c6, knight e5, and that knight on e5 is the pride of black's position. So several factors here that might define the next couple of moves.
If you were, I'll put you on the spot. If you were white here, what's your initial instinct? What would you go for?
I would probably go for f5. I mean, and this might be like a Duda syndrome where I'm very curious what exactly Niels has prepared. But f5 is definitely the principal move. But my secondary candidate would be queen e1, queen g3, which is a queen lift up to g3 in order to put pressure both along the g file and on the e5 pawn. So
well, this is another game where Esipenko has taken a lot of time compared to his opponent. He doesn't seem like he's ready to make a decision just yet, but certainly another game which is shaping. I think today we're spoiled once again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very combative lines. You're absolutely right. Esipenko taking quite a lot of time here, which makes sense because pawns don't go backwards. If you play a move like f5 and then you allow black to break through with d5, why did I play f5? Then you play if you play queen e1 and maybe black takes on why didn't I play f5? So it's one of those things I explained yesterday. You are going to regret whatever decision you make. And you know that too. That's the worst thing. So you keep trying to weigh the pros and cons. You can't decide if it happens.
He was actually looking, if you look at him on camera there, I know you have a couple of seconds delayed, it looked like he was actually regretting his choice already, even before making it, and then he played queen d3.
Okay, so that's actually a similar move to queen e1. I do think that he is thinking about putting the queen on g3. That's just he's taking the 485 rather than the 77. He's taking one freeway rather than another. Sorry, not everybody will get the reference. Those are Charlotte freeways. Yeah. Oh my God, you haven't heard of the freeways in Charlotte? Unacceptable. But
I don't know if I would even manage to place Charlotte on the map, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have either before I moved there, so I still might not be able to. But in any case, queen d3. And what is the benefit of putting the queen on d3 versus e1? Because queen e1, queen g3, oops, sorry, did not mean to click to the, and I think we may need to refresh one moment here. So let's see if I can get this to work now. So basically, just one moment. So my apologies.
Yeah, actually, maybe we're gonna go on a very, very quick break in order to bring the board back. So we'll be back
Indeed.
in just a second. So
Yep.
don't go anywhere. And we're back with all the action from round 4. And let's just jump straight back into it. You're just going to explain to us the differences of the queen going to d3 or to e1.
Yeah, I mean, I think the queen is there might be no difference. It might transpose, but ultimately the queen is supervising the center. I brought up this story of sometimes when you're in time pressure and you need to go to the bathroom in an over the board chess game, you do this weird little dance where you're getting up and you're looking back at the board and you make sure you take the path to the bathroom where you can see the board all the way to the bathroom, so that if your opponent makes a move, you can run back to the board and make a response. And this can be thought of in that way. The queen is sort of supervising the center, making sure that a move like d5, something crazy like this, is out of the question. Because here, after f takes e5 at the very least, and that's probably not even the best move, but that certainly does the job. I mean, now you just take on e4 and you're up a pawn. If you had played queen e1, then I actually do think that d5 would have been a legitimate candidate move. Maybe not a very good one, but something that would have needed to be reckoned with, because after f takes e5, knight takes e4, black restores material equality and you get kind of an unclear position. So that might be one reason. Perhaps there's others as well. In case white plays f5, the queen does keep the d5 square under supervision. So it seems quite a subtle idea by Esipenko. I kind of like this move.
That's certainly a metaphor. I won't be forgetting the queen being linked to a player trying to get a bathroom break while low on time.
G3, but let me keep d5 under control. Yeah. Anyways, sorry, that's a little out there, but hopefully it helps people understand the position better. That's ultimately the goal.
I'm sure it will. Well, not Magnus. Niels is still considering his options, but shall we go back to Magnus's game?
Yeah, definitely. Lots of stuff has happened in that game. We had observed the moment after c5 and Jurriaan deciding to develop his bishop first, which is sensible. We had talked also about knight g3, and we will see that move played in just a second. After d5, we have a mass trade. First, Jurriaan takes the knight on f6 to soften up the d5 square.
Oh, and we are back. That was quick. Apologies about that. But we are straight back with the Magnus game. And yeah, the piece is coming off the board.
Yeah, and I think what I was explaining is that this e4 square can be covered by a pawn that lands on f5. So one idea is to play bishop e5. And if you just sort of play knight e4 and say, well, look at my knight is awesome. No, it's not. Get out of there, f5, and that knight is chased away. So that actually can get very dangerous for white. If Jurriaan doesn't find a way to kind of establish his pieces in the center, his position can get very cramped. And to that effect, I think Magnus can play bishop e5. He doesn't have to rush with that. I mean, rook on e8. That would be a very Magnus-like decision, just very calmly waiting for Jurriaan to play knight e4 and then playing bishop e5. But in the event of something like this, then Jurriaan could go queen f3, for example, and control that square, and perhaps also then threatening this knight f6 check x-ray. So this is an important decision for Magnus, and you're going to have a very classic battle between knight and bishop. Which piece is going to be stronger? I like Magnus's position here. I think he's got a little more space. He's got a good pawn structure, but I think the position is equal, and I think Jurriaan is doing a good job of really sort of get in kind of calm position where Magnus could start getting frustrated that he doesn't have quite the kind of winning chances that he might like to have.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where the pieces, and what do you think is the ideal piece placement for both sides here?
Yeah, I mean, the real question is, when does white want to play knight e4? Because you don't want to rush this move, as I explained. Another idea is to play the move g6. So maybe the bishop should be enquered and tucked away safely. And another idea, of course, is knight e4, bishop g7. Once again, black is ready to play f5 now and chase away the knight. So Jurriaan doesn't want to rush with that. So maybe you want to keep the knight on g3 for the time being. Another key question is, do we want the queens off the board? If you're Jurriaan, if you're Magnus, I don't think it's worth going queen f3 and ruining your pawn structure in order to trade queens. But that's not out of the question because there's really nothing to exploit this pawn structure with. Black is slightly better here, but it might not be enough to win the game. So, and the third question is, does Magnus want to play the move c4 at some point and expand his queenside pawn pressure? That move doesn't really accomplish anything in and of itself, but maybe it's part of a series of moves that puts pressure on white's position. Very interesting position. It may look very simple, but there's a lot of decisions to be made for both sides here.
I mean, certainly far from simple in general, but especially not when you're playing against Magnus. And Magnus, who was left, slightly frustrated yesterday, I think, after his game against Tari, where a lot of pieces came off the board early on. And although Magnus was pushing ever so slightly, it just wasn't enough.
And Magnus has indeed gone c4. So he has decided to expand that pressure on the queen side and put some heat on white's d3 pawn. Now, Jurriaan certainly does not want to take this pawn because that would move that key defender from the e4 square. It would deprive the knight of its natural placement. Jurriaan has a couple of moves here. Queen g4 comes to mind, just activating the queen. Of course, that old move knight e4 we talked about should certainly be considered. And maybe Jurriaan wants to play something like rook e1, sort of procrastinating in a good way, improving a piece and seeing how Magnus just decides to arrange his pieces.
I have a question. If we go queen g1, are we kind of threatening to play knight h5?
Ooh, yeah, I think we definitely are. Just for example, let's say black improves the position of his rook. We can go knight h5. And, well, this threatens knight takes f6 because of the pin. And if bishop e5, I think you intended to move f4, Fiona, and that's definitely quite unpleasant for black. Black can save the bishop by playing f5 and then dropping the bishop back to f6 so that the rook protects that bishop. But this is definitely probably going to bail out, and that's not what Magnus wants. So certainly that's an idea.
Actually, if the bishop and the knight were to come off the board, do you think Magnus would still have a little something as his pawns are more advanced, or do you think it would just be even?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think Magnus maybe has a tiny something. So, for example, queen g3, bishop has to drop back. And see, if I were Jurriaan, I wouldn't take on f6 here. That bishop isn't going anywhere. I would play the move rook a to e1 and try to wrest control of the e file from white. One of the common mistakes that's often committed in these kinds of positions is you just assume, it's a draw, rook e1. And then what happens is black will play rook f to e6. He's like, no, I'm not giving you the e file. And now you can't play rook e1. And now ideas like queen e2 or queen e3 check become very, very unpleasant. So these games that seem very drawish are often lost because one side loses control of a key file.
Yeah, this already, I wouldn't wanna be white here, but yeah, certainly a lot of things to consider here. For your, and I like your suggestion though of queen g4 because I also feel it's about time I linked my rooks, and got the queen out. I'm struggling to even think of other moves right now.
Yeah, I mean, queen g4 certainly is supernatural. Well, not supernatural in the sense of ghostly or magical, but it is very or extremely natural. But rook e1, I think, is also a sensible move. And knight e4 should also be considered. But I am leaning toward queen g4. The one problem that I will mention, and this is a little bit, maybe I'm going a little too deep, but if black does play this move g6 that I had mentioned and then drops his bishop back to g7, one problem is that this queen on g4 could actually get caught in the crosshairs of this move f5. That move could come with tempo, and you certainly don't want Magnus to gain all control of the e4 square with tempo. So maybe that is something Jurriaan has to factor in. I don't think it's a deal breaker per se, but it is a factor that that Jurriaan should definitely consider while making his decision. And he's taking his time here. This is a complicated moment for sure.
Absolutely. Let's leave Jurriaan to it for now. We'll come back to it. Can we check in? What was that Najdorf? Was it the Grandelius game or?
Well, Grandelius is there's Esipenko Grandelius, and Esipenko is still.
I meant the other. What was the game? Yes, that's the one.
Yep, both are Najdorfs. These are our two darlings, our two Najdorf games. Let's check in on the other one, Donchenko against Wojciech. This is definitely a sharper Najdorf, and we joined. We had seen this moment, right, when Radek had gone h4, and response by Donchenko, very, very sharp f4, just trying to open up that f file. And the one thing that we mentioned is he's got to decide where to put his king, and for the time being, he keeps his king in the center, which is sensible. But I think at some point, and perhaps that moment has arrived, he has to decide which way he castles. My inclination, I don't actually know. I mean, castling short, I really like the fact that this gains control of the f file, but certainly a big decision here to be made by Alexander Donchenko.
Yeah, a lot to consider. He spent 20 minutes since we last left him, just on that one move f4, and now considering his next option. So we will leave him to it as well. We're actually going to take just a very, very short break to set up our first guest of the day. I'm very much looking forward to having Dr. and Grandmaster John Nunn with us in just a second. So don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back with him. Welcome back, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a very special guest, Grandmaster and Dr. John Nunn. John, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure having you.
Well, thanks very much, Fiona. It's nice to be joining your show this afternoon.
Maybe just a quick introduction, seeing as there's been so many new people coming to the game this year who might not be familiar with all the things you achieved in chess and in numerous other fields. So John is a three-time world champion in chess problem solving. We'll talk about that in a sec. He's a very prolific chess writer. And you were also one of the youngest graduates in Oxford. I'll get to all that in a second. It's a lot to touch upon, but we have to talk first about John. You played here in Vachier-lagrave. You played here 7 times, and you won it 3 times. In 1982, in 1990, and in 1991. So maybe my first question to you is, what memories do you have of playing here in Vachier-lagrave?
I always enjoyed playing in Vachier-lagrave. It's always been a very friendly tournament. And of course, if you have success on the board, it does create a favourable impression. But even despite that, even the years when I didn't play so well, I still had a good time, and I always look forward to coming again the year after. And
And
as you say, I won 3 times, once jointly in 1982 and twice outright. And great times in those days.
Well, I can only imagine, and let's maybe especially talk about the achievement of winning it back to back, which only very few players have. Apologies about that. Hopefully, we'll be all right now. John, my apologies to you as well, and welcome back once again, Grandmaster John Nunn with us. John, I was just saying you won the tournament back to back, which only very few players have achieved in the history of the tournament. Do you have any special memories of that?
Yes, I mean, it was certainly a great chess festival. And of course, it was not only the Grandmaster tournament, but there were lots of other events as well for masters and for club players. And I often met Dutch players there every year who would come and play in one of the lower tournaments. And it was always fun to chat to the chess enthusiasts of all levels. And it excited a huge amount of public interest, and of course, it still does today. And I think one of the things that strikes me about this Vachier-lagrave tournament is the large amount of public interest. Big reports in newspapers. Now, of course, we have internet and video, which you're heavily involved in. But it's not only the chess, it's also the way it's brought to a wide audience that struck me as being a particular feature of this event.
Yeah, I think it really, Vachier-lagrave throughout the years always have been such a big festival. As you say, so many locals getting involved, coming by. It's free entry. Everyone can join in on the fun and see these, best players in the world from so close up. This year, unfortunately, the event had to be very different with only the 14 masters, no spectators, no amateurs, no challenger groups. Have you been following the tournament?
Yes, I've been following the tournament. That was been a kind of mixed bag. Some very interesting games. I mean, obviously, Caruana's game yesterday was fascinating. Good positional game yesterday by Hare Krishna, I thought.
Hmm.
Always a crop of interesting games.
And maybe also in previous years, there was always a big side event here. If I recall correctly, there was always a big chess problem-solving competition. Did you ever come to Vachier-lagrave for that rather than for the main event in recent years?
Yes, several years ago, I came for the study solving competition, which was held always on the final weekend. And I think I won it twice. But I didn't play. It was after my kind of retirement, as it were. Well, I still play a little bit even today. Although at the moment, it's all online, of course. But when I retired from playing professionally, again, I enjoyed watching the tournament, and I took part in the solving competition.
Actually, how do you balance the many interests that you have these days? So you're still into problem solving. I know that you are very passionate about astronomy. You're a prolific author. You have authored so many chess books. So how do you balance all these things?
Well, it makes for a busy life, of course. But yeah, I think I'm probably more heavily involved in problem solving right now than playing chess. Um, well, age is a factor, but I'm currently actually the British problem solving champion.
Oh, wow.
So it's something you can do even when you're in your mid 60s. Whereas that over the board chess becomes, I think, quite difficult once you start to approach 50. Although, of course, players like Vichy have continued to have an active career for quite a long time.
And I just have a last couple of questions for you before we let you go. One of the other things you're also still active in is writing chess books. Do you have any new books in coming up?
Well, I've just released a book called the Chess Endgame Exercise Book, which is for, so we say, good club players. It's selling very well, and it's a whole book of training exercises for the endgame. Of course, as the author, I'm definitely going to recommend it.
I'm sure that would be very useful for a lot of our viewers. So go get your hands on it. And John, just the last question for me. I think one of the most interesting things about all your achievements is you actually graduated um, from Oxford College. Well, at 15 years of age, you were Oxford's youngest undergraduate since Cardinal Wolsey in 1520. So you know something about what it is to be, a child prodigy. And I wanted to ask you on your thoughts about Alireza Firouzja, who these days, he's the child prodigy, I think, of the chess world. So what are your thoughts on Alireza?
Oh, he's obviously an incredibly talented player. I mean, with a lot of success and a bright career ahead of him. But one thing I should say is that I was considered a child prodigy, and then the years passed, and then suddenly, without any warning, it seemed I was the oldest player in the tournament. So it doesn't last forever. Enjoy it while you can.
Actually, there's one last thing that just occurred to me now. I remember, I'd forgotten about this, but I remember reading that Magnus Carlsen actually said about you in an interview that the reason you didn't become a world champion is because you were too smart for your own good and too many interests. So, what did you make of Magnus's assessment?
Well, he's a very polite man.
John, we'll end it. We'll end it on that. Thank you so very much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure having you, and I hope we'll have you back here in Weichensee on site in the coming years.
Sure. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you. Have a nice day. And we'll be back with Dania in just a second. And welcome back, Dania. It's great having you back, but it was also so great having John Nunn on the show. I mean, such an accomplished man, but so nice, so humble, and it was great to hear it from him. But let's go back to the games now. A lot of action here in round 4.
Indeed there is. And really, I mean, he's just such a legend. I mean, so multifaceted, so many achievements from books to puzzle solving genius, astronomy, photography. I mean, a true Renaissance man in the best possible way. And that was awesome. And I think you conducted that great. So let's jump back into the games though. Any game that you'd like to start with in particular, Fiona? Anything catching your eye?
Well, I saw you hover for a second over the Magnus game. Do we have a couple more pieces coming off the board there?
So after c4, Jurriaan did indeed. So rookie one was one of the two moves that we had mentioned, just sort of improving the position. Magnus responding in kind with the move rook a to e8. And now Jurriaan going a4. And basically what he's done is he's waited for black to get off of the a file. And now, of course, because he's got a rook on a1, opening up the a file is kind of in his favor. And also that leads to more trades. And Jurriaan certainly wouldn't mind a draw. Magnus does trade on e1, and Magnus has just taken on d3. So rapidly, we see a lot of pieces coming off the board. What I think Magnus wants to do here is perhaps go queen to b3 and actually try to go after these pawns. So this is no last